Okay, so we're going to spend another day practicing all types of factoring. So there were technically 5 types of factoring. The first we introduced was GCF. That means the greatest common factor, what they all terms have in common. So no matter what the problem is, we always check for a GCF before we try to figure out which factoring it is. After we've checked for a GCF, if you have 2 terms within the parentheses, we check to see if it's a dot. This doesn't mean it's always going to be a dot. It just depends. How we check? The coefficients have to be perfect squares. The exponents have to be even, and it has to be subtraction. So if I look at my 2 examples, there is not a GCF for x squared minus 64, but it is a dot because x has an even exponent, 64 is a perfect square, and it is subtraction. So I can break it up into 2 binomials. What times itself is x squared? X. What times itself is 64? 8. To be a dot, plus minus, and there's my answer. If I look for a GCF here, this one has a GCF of 2n. If I look at what's remaining, 8m squared n has a divided by 2n is 9m squared. Negative 2n cubed divided by 2n is negative n squared. Okay, so then I look, once I took care of that GCF, now I have a dot, a difference of 2 squares. 9 and 1 are perfect squares. M and n have even exponents, and it is subtraction. So I'm going to bring down my GCF I had brought originally, and I'm going to break this up into 2 binomials. What times itself is 9? 3. What times itself is m squared? M. What times itself is n squared? N. And the dot means plus minus. And then we go to the next type. After I've looked for a GCF and I have 3 terms, it will either be a basic trinomial or a slip and slide. A basic trinomial is whenever I don't have anything out in front of x squared. It's just a 1. A slip and slide is when I have taken care of the GCF, but I still have a value out in front of my trinomial. Then it becomes a slip and slide. So let's go over both types. Here's first example. It's a basic trinomial because there's nothing out in front of x squared. So I can go ahead and break this up into 2 binomials, x and x. Since c is negative, that means that means they're going to be different. One's positive, one's negative. What multiplies to get 42 but subtracts to get 1? The 2 numbers that come up are 7 and 6. Now, it matters where I put the bigger number, the 7, and I have to put it with the sign that b is. And the sign that b was negative. So I'm going to put 7 with the negative and 6 with the positive. If I look at the second one, at first it looks like a slip and slide because I have this 2 out in front. But remember, our very first step is to look for a GCF. So my GCF would be a 2. 2w squared divided by 2 is w squared. 20w divided by 2 is 10w. And 50 divided by 2 is 25. Now it becomes a basic trinomial with this GCF out in front. So I can break it up into 2 binomials, and w times w. Since c is positive, that means they're both going to be the same. B tells me that they're both going to be positive. What multiplies to get 25 but adds to get 10? And the 2 numbers that come up are 5 and 5. So it doesn't matter where I put the 5s because they're both 5s and they're both positives. And there I'm done. So the other type of a trinomial is the slip and slide. A slip and slide is after I've taken care of the GCF, but I still have a value out in front of the trinomial. For instance here, 30, 27, and 6 have a GCF of 3. 30x squared divided by 3 is 10x squared. Negative 27x divided by 3 is negative 9x. And 6 divided by 3 is 2. So even though I did have a GCF, I still have a value of 10 out in front. So this is a slip and slide. Slip and slide, so I'm going to slip the 10 to the 2, keep the GCF out in front. So it becomes x squared minus 9x, 10 times 2 is positive 20. Now that it becomes a basic trinomial, I can break it up into 2 binomials and follow the rules I've been learning. Since c is positive, that means they're both going to be positive or both going to be negative. Since b is negative, that means they're both going to be negative. What multiplies to get 20 but adds to get 9? And the 2 numbers that come up are 5 and 4. It doesn't matter where I put the 5 and the 4 because they are both negative. Now, this was a slip and slide, which means I have to bring that 10 back as a denominator and simplify if I can. For instance, 5 over 10 simplifies to 1/2. 4 over 10 simplifies to 2/5. And now becomes the slide part. So I'm going to slide the denominators back to the front of that binomial. So this becomes 2x minus 1, and this becomes 5x minus 2. The last and final type after we look for the GCF is when I'm left with 4 terms. 4 terms, we call it grouping. So first we check for a GCF here, which there isn't one that they all 4 have in common. So what I do is I break it up into 2 binomials. Now I look for the GCF within each of those binomials. 2a cubed and negative a squared b has a GCF of a squared. So I look at what's left. 2a cubed divided by a squared is 2a. Negative a squared b divided by a squared is negative b. The GCF of 10a minus 5b is positive 5. 10a divided by 5 is 2a, and negative 5b divided by 5 is negative 1b. So if I look at it, my 2 binomials ended up being the same, which is what we want when we're dealing with grouping. So I'm going to bring my 2 GCFs together to form a squared plus 5. And then my 2 binomials that were the same become 1, so 2a minus b. Keep in mind what we didn't cover were there could be factorings within other factorings. For instance, the most common that I see is that we could have a dot within these other ones just pop up. So you always have to keep in mind and look out for dots. Otherwise, those are the types of factoring that we've covered.